Three, two, one.
Well, welcome everyone to this conversation I've been looking forward to for a long time on cultivating compassion, Buddhist and Christian approaches in dialogue. I am Frank Rogers Jr. I'm a professor of spiritual formation and the co-director of the Center for Engaged Compassion at Claremont School of Theology. And it is a great delight for me to share this time with these very esteemed colleagues on this panel. We are being hosted, of course, by the Global Compassion Coalition, and I want to express a deep sense of gratitude for all the members there that have been so supportive and hospitable. Certainly to Rick Hansen, who was the vision behind this coalition and has just been unwavering in his support and encouragement for all conversations, but this one in particular. I also want to express my gratitude to Rachel Ebanks Gold, who's just been terrific in working with all of the technical and logistical administrative dimensions of this conversation and this panel. So great, deep bow of gratitude to both of you and to all of those at the GCC. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, and just to get started, I thought I'd just read a very short poem to kind of frame our conversations. It's a poem that's quite aptly entitled "Compassion." It's only 3 lines, written by Miller Williams. Have compassion for everyone you meet, even if they don't want it. What seems conceit, bad manners, or cynicism is always a sign of things no ears have heard, no eyes have seen. You do not know what wars are going on down there, where the spirit meets the bone. It feels appropriate that we're having this conversation on Earth Day, that day that we all pause to recognize the suffering that permeates our planet. It's a pain, of course, that not only infects the environment, but infects peoples throughout the globe. And it's a time to remember, indeed, the various types of wars that are going on down there, deep where the spirit meets the bone. My sense is that all of us here on this conversation recognize that compassion is one of those ingredients, kind of that spiritual energy that stills those wars and heals the wounds that are caused by them. We are all representing traditions, Buddhist and Christian traditions, where compassion is deeply woven into the very heartbeat of what we consider life that is whole and absolutely able to heal the pain in our planet. The question that each of us, I think, have been given our research to is the how. So how is compassion actually cultivated? What are the practices and sensibilities and behaviors that help actually cultivate a life of goodwill and care, that nurture those connections, that help us ease the suffering in the world and promote the well-being of all of life? Each of us are part of an organization, an educational entity, a center, a community that has given ourselves to researching that very question, the how of compassion cultivation. And so this is an opportunity for each of us to be able to share a few words about the insights that we have gained, about how compassion is cultivated, the challenges that we have found along the way. And it's an opportunity that we rarely get, where we can compare notes with each other about things that we've learned along the way, similarities that we discovered that we have in common, a distinctiveness perhaps from our different centers and approaches or different spiritual traditions. So the way the conversation will be formed is I'm going to invite each of you to spend a few minutes to sharing your own insights around how you understand compassion and the ways in which your center or educational entity cultivates compassion. What you've learned along the way, the insights that prove to be really restorative and transformative, the challenges that you have encountered along the way, and how you've learned to navigate them as well. And after each of you have been able to share from your own specific centers and educational entities. Then we'll have a conversation about similarities that we see with each other, questions that we might have for each other, distinctivenesses we'd like to lift up and celebrate, and have a conversation amongst the six of us. So if that is okay, we'll proceed. And I'll just introduce you each one in order as we go through our initial presentations, if that's okay. So I'd like to start with our esteemed colleague, Dr. Lobsang Tenzin Negi. Dr. Negi is the Executive Director of the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics and Professor of Pedagogy at the Department of Religion at Emory University. Dr. Negi is both a scholar and a spiritual practitioner, spearheaded multiple innovative programs, including the Emory Tibet Science Initiative, and he is the founder of the Drepung Losling Monastery in Atlanta in the United States. We're very grateful to have Dr. Negi with us. So please, Dr. Negi, share with us a bit from your work and your research.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roger. And good afternoon or good evening to everyone. Yes, it's really a pleasure to be with you all, and I echo Dr. Rogers' comment about the Global Compassion Coalition. It's really an incredible platform, an initiative to raise awareness about the compassion. So I will say a little bit, as we have 7-8 minutes, to say a little bit about what I understand compassion to be. What are some of the essential ingredients from the Buddhist perspective, and some of the experiences as I've been involved in the work of compassion for the last number of years. So as Dr. Roger mentions, I am at Emory University at the Center for Science and Compassion-Based Ethics. I am a former Tibetan Buddhist monk. I was born in the Himalayas, and I was a monk for a number of years, and for the last 30 years or so, have been here in America at Emory University. At the Compassion Center at Emory University, we of course have developed a program in compassion. It's called Cognitively Based Compassion Training. It draws the way to cultivate compassion from the Indo-Tibetan Buddhist tradition, but rendered secular. So it's not a religion kind of framed strictly in a religious context or the Buddhist religious context. But as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, that compassion is really a universal value, and it's something that all religious traditions have emphasized and value, but also those who don't have any religion, who don't believe, belong to any particular religious tradition. Compassion is also an important part. In that sense, compassion really is an essential element for our human society, as essential for our survival as the clean water or the clean air. In the words of His Holiness, he says that love and compassion are not luxuries, they are necessities without which humanity cannot survive. So when speaking about compassion, Buddha, actually, he saw this as a human value, as I mentioned, maybe not even human value. I mean, compassion is present in animals as well. But in Buddha's word, he said that what is that one value? If you have it in the palm of your hands, all the other values like generosity, forgiveness, patience, respect for others, these will be present. And he says that that's karuna, or mahakaruna, great compassion. Great compassion, one that is unbiased, great compassion that embraces all beings, not just humans, all living beings. Now, compassion, it is defined fundamentally as a warm-hearted concern. It's the warm-hearted feeling, that unfolds when we understand or witness the suffering of others and feel motivated to relieve such suffering. So it's a complex psychological state, if you will. It has this affective or the emotional component, that is the warm-hearted feeling, the tender feeling, the tender sense of connection with others, like the mother would feel for her child, or the child for her parents, or the good friend for another friend. There's this emotional component. That's really the kind of essence of compassion, that warm-hearted feeling towards others. And then it has the cognitive component, that is the awareness of the suffering of others, or the witnessing the suffering of others. And then the motivational part, when out of that warm-hearted connection, as we come to see or understand what they are going through, what their predicaments are, then the unfolding response, the heartfelt response, that is the motivation to alleviate that. So that's what the compassion is understood. And in terms of cultivating compassion, of course, that in Buddhist tradition, there are two major approaches to cultivating compassion. One that takes more of first establishing a really sort of the emotional connection by seeing all beings as your mother, not the mother from this life, of course, as the Buddhists believe in the previous lives and infinite previous lives. And so in that sense, every living being has been at one time or another, or multiple times, been your loving, unconditionally loving, caring mother. So it's kind of establishing recognition of all beings as your loving, caring mother. That's in the Buddhist context. I'm not talking about in the secular context, but that's traditional Buddhist. One of the approaches first is to connect with the beings emotionally, with that sense of being, is recognizing them as mother. There is a bonding. I mean, it's for us mammals, there is a clear sense of bonding in between the those attachment figures, like the crucial caregivers, like primarily one's own mother or the father, and ourselves. So in that sense, one approach kind of gets into building that warm connection with others by recognizing that everyone has been one's mother, and then from there on, then you go about reflecting the kindness, in what ways that we have received their kindness. That's and then in both recognizing others as one's mother as a way to form that connection, and then further, bringing into our awareness that in how many different ways, we have benefited, we have been cared for from those mothers, whether they are right now, they are our family members or friends, or they are at the moment they are strangers to us, or even those people who may have different kind of ideologies, the preferences, the values, or whose attitudes and behaviors we may not agree with, so-called adversary. But by reframing this, by kind of the seeing or shifting our perspective of that, and that establishing that connection to bring about that sense of tenderness, warm-heartedness, and of course the second major approach is really has to do with what's called the exchanging self with others, and there are a lot of literature, a lot of practices kind of that written on this approach, which is basically, again, first of all, to connect with others. This is perhaps less of the kind of this more the metaphysical, basically less metaphysical in the sense that it first leads you to recognize that how we ourselves have deep aspiration to be safe, to be happy, to be free from suffering. We have needs. When those needs are met, we feel joy, comfort, safety. When they are not met, we feel the so-called negative emotions. So turning that lens to other beings around. The other beings are just like us in that they too are living beings with the basic needs, with emotional needs, and when they are met or not met, they have the emotions, the feelings, just like us. In that sense, that bringing this sense of fundamental equality, that we fundamentally, despite our surface differences, we have so much in common, and recognizing that, and then further then recognizing in many ways that we receive now. For example, a piece of clothing that we wear, it comes from so many people. Like Dr. King, succinctly mentioned that before we finish eating breakfast, we have depended on half of the world at least, and this is the kind of the nature, the structure of our the universe, our us, and that is deeply, infinitely connected nature, and recognizing that brings a sense of further deepening sense of connection, and then on that then educating ourselves, being aware of in what ways the people are struggling, whether they are just physical or emotional illnesses, relationship problems, professional problems, or even structural sufferings that are they are up against certain structural or the cultural structural systems that are stacked up against them. As we become aware, then from that warm-hearted connection, the response, a natural response for us would be some sense of urge to alleviate that difficulties, both the manifest suffering and the causes of suffering. So that's how it is cultivated. For us, as I mentioned, that at Emory University, we have been doing research and teaching compassion for many years now. In so many ways, it has been really incredible. With one thing that I can share is that we brought this to Emory Medical School, and we see that how that has really been received, so much so that like one of the deans of the medical school actually went on to be certified as the medical CBCT teacher, this cognitively based compassion training teacher, not from the Buddhist side, but more secularized version, and then teaching. But there are of course challenges also. Like one of the real challenges is it's how to have the people stick to the this 8-week program. The retention is something that has always been something that we wanted to understand better how to improve that, and I'm interested in hearing and learning from our colleagues about how we can make the compassion training protocols or the program more sticky, that people can do it, how we can do it in this busy lifestyle that we live, stick to these programs. So that's all I have to share briefly. Thank you so much. Frank, we can't hear you.
Yeah, but first rule, right, is to unmute yourself, right? Yeah, thank you. But thank you, Dr. Negi, for that wonderful synopsis of your work and for the great work that you're doing at Emory and beyond. So look forward to continued conversations.
Thank you so much.
Our next presenter is Dr. Cinda Rushton, who is a professor of clinical ethics at Johns Hopkins University. She is a student and colleague of Roshi Joan Halifax and is a primary teacher of the GRACE model of compassion cultivation from the Upaya Zen Center. So, Dr. Rushton, we look forward to hearing your remarks about your work. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I in full disclosure, I am not a Buddhist scholar. I am a nurse. And as a, as a result of that, have had the privilege of teaching with Roshi Joan for more than 20 years, both in our Being with Thine, excuse me, in our Being with Thine program and Grace. So I want to sort of preface my comments by honoring Roshi's incredible work in the area of compassion, and really some of her groundbreaking work in distilling the non-compassion elements into the mnemonic grace. So, you know, as we think about compassion, as Dr. Negi has already pointed out, it's in a way, a simple but complex state of being. You know, if you really think about it, it's the capacity to attend to the experience of others, to really notice what's happening around us, whether it is sentient beings or our earth, and to feel that concern, that warm-hearted concern that is motivated by that awareness. And importantly, to sense into what might actually serve when we notice, notice the suffering of others, and how we might actually, or even potentially, be of service in those instances. So it's that cultivation of that kind of receptivity and awareness, and the motivation actually to do something about it. We often think about it as a spontaneous kind of experience. You can't will yourself to be compassionate. And so what's really been important in our work, based on Roshi's research, bringing neuroscience and Buddhist practice together, is that her approach really reflects the idea that cultivating compassion is comprised of non-compassion elements. And so from her abide model of compassion, which includes the elements of attention and affect, of being balanced, having insight and intention as part of those elements, discernment, embodiment, and then what we do once we have realized what might serve, how we actually enact that. And so from that sort of broader framework, it was distilled down to 5 elements that are called grace. And grace stands for, first of all, the G of grace is gathering our attention. And if you think about our world right now, there's so much distraction. You know, being able to actually focus our attention on our own experience, on what's happening around us, grounding ourselves by helping our nervous system to relax and to be able to focus and be able to see things clearly, is really the foundation in our model of compassion. That really, without that, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to see things clearly, to perceive them, and then to serve others in response to that. The R of grace is recalling our intention. And Dr. Negi talked about the universal value of compassion. And intention is really helps us to focus our attention and give us direction. It is a motivation. And when you think about intention, our values, our core of who we are and what we stand for, is really the basis for our intentions. And our intentions then are a reflection of our ethical values, our ethical orientation. It kind of primes our intention for what we pay attention to. And from that, then our intentions drive our behavior. And so if we can really recall, for example, as a nurse, why am I here? What is my purpose? What is my role? And how might I use that connection to why I'm here as a way to focus my attention in the context of seeing suffering all around me? The A of grace is attunement. And this is a really interesting component of grace, because the attunement starts first with ourselves. And for any of us who are trained as clinicians, we've been trained to focus on the other. But the A of grace starts with attuning first to ourselves. How am I showing up? How am I in this moment? And then once we have awareness of ourselves, both body, heart, mind, then we're able to enlarge our awareness to include the other, and to attune to and to resonate and perceive the person or persons that we are in relationship with. The C of grace is considering what will serve. And I have to say, sometimes this is a really challenging place for us in an ego-dominated world where we all think we have to know the answers. So considering what will serve is a place of humility. It is a place of not knowing, of being surprised, of being open to what might emerge, rather than our own agenda or what we think might be the answer in the particular circumstance. And so consider what will serve is really a place of deep discernment, of inquiry, to ask ourselves what else might be true and how might we understand the situation in its fullness, so that we can decide and discern what might serve ourselves and others in this circumstance. And then the E of grace, Roshi has a lot of E's, but the sort of essence of the E of grace is enacting. So we go from considering to actually taking action, or we may decide that the right thing to do is not to act, and that is also a choice. But the enactment is a way for us to, first of all, embody who we really are, our values, our sort of way of being that communicates our concern for others. But it's also a connection to our values. So our ethical orientation, our foundation of values, and how those values can be reflected in the choices that we make, how we communicate, what we decide to do. Mm-hmm. So all of these elements then are what really create the conditions for compassion to arise. And what's been just incredible in teaching this and learning it and practicing it and trying to refine, the doorways into these many elements of compassion is that there's something important about being able to deconstruct some of these non-compassion elements to make it possible to access parts of ourselves that maybe we've lost connection with. And we certainly see that a lot with clinicians. It's a chaotic world everywhere. It's particularly true in healthcare right now. But the mnemonic of grace gives people a roadmap, a set of practical tools and skills that really can help to create the conditions for compassion to arise in the moment. We've also learned that it can be taught. We've been doing 3-day workshops for the last several years. We did them as well during COVID virtually. But there's something important about a community practicing together. And we've seen these programs on grace be done in Japan with clinicians as well as business leaders and many other places. But it's important, I think, to have the space and time for people to practice these elements We do them in a sequential manner to begin with. We have to start slow and practice each one, and then ultimately we put them together in an integrative session. So what are some of the challenges? Well, all you have to do is look around us. The whole world is in crisis, but in our work with clinicians, healthcare is particularly in crisis. There's a lot of relational depletion. There's constant distraction. Our attention is dispersed and divided. And I would suggest we have a human energy crisis with the level of exhaustion that we're seeing among clinicians. And so when you think about, as Dr. Negi said, how do we engage people and how do we sustain them in this work? I think one of the challenges is that people want a quick fix. They want a recipe. And it's really a practice. And as a result of that, our mind starts telling us, I don't have time. And yet at the same time, I think there's no better time than right now for us to really turn our attention toward how we create the conditions for compassion in whatever setting that we're in. The other part that is happening quite a bit in healthcare is the sense of futility. The sense of feeling that nothing we do makes a difference. And as His Holiness says, the antidote to futility is compassion. And that compassion, I think, has to be turned toward our own limitations, our own suffering, as well as the suffering of others. And I think a lot of times what happens in these workshops is that we create space for clinicians and other people who are doing human service work to notice their own suffering, to notice the fact that in the process of serving others, that they too carry a lot. And as a result of that, are in need of some compassion toward themselves. The other thing I would say is this is not a see one, do one, teach one, which is a common practice in medical training. It really is a practice that requires ongoing investment. It's like every other practice. It takes time, it takes engagement and commitment to build that compassion muscle so that it's accessible under stress and distress. So I think that what I've learned is what an incredible resource it is to be able to have this step-by-step process to remind me of what can happen in the moment when we really give ourselves a pause and space to allow compassion to arise. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rushton, for that very succinct and clear summary of this approach to compassion, and for reminding us of what healthcare workers are undergoing, how important this work is for their well-being and for all of ours. And thanks for bringing Roche Joan Halifax into our midst as well, a dear friend and supporter of the GCC, and of course her commitment to all of this work is legendary. So thank you. Wonderful. Now, a deep honor for me to introduce Dr. James Doty. Dr. Doty is the founding director of the Stanford Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, known as CCARE. He is a philanthropist whose work has spanned the globe, a best-selling author, and he has been at the center of the architect of this approach to teaching compassion that has been now taught around the world and really has impacted millions of people. Deeply grateful for the work that you've been doing, and thank you for being here, Dr. Doty.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to our two previous speakers who really encapsulated fundamentally the Buddhist perspective of compassion. As some of the listeners may know, the center at Stanford Actually, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was the founding benefactor, and I had the privilege over about 3 years of Thupten Jinpa, who has been His Holiness's primary English translator for well over a few decades, to work with me a week a month. And through his own insights and obviously deep knowledge of Buddhist philosophy and practice, has assisted in developing a number of the programs that we have at Stanford. I do want to preface and tell everyone that I am not a Buddhist scholar. I'm a believer in a variety of aspects of Buddhist philosophy. But I think the other aspect is I have a deep interest in the neuroscience of compassion and how it affects the brain and how it affects different aspects of the brain. And I'll just briefly mention that and then get back to more specifically Buddhist philosophy and how that's impacted the work that I've been able to do. What a lot of people don't appreciate is that as a species, we evolved to care. We're one of the few species that doesn't swim off into or swim away or run off into the forest or the jungle. Our offspring have to be cared for. So we actually have a genetic imperative to care. And the interesting thing about that is that when you care, and you can imagine the amount of time and resources that are involved, that you are rewarded. And the way you're rewarded is that your pleasure and reward centers are stimulated, and your peripheral physiology is significantly impacted in a positive way. It shifts you from, if you want to call it your threat mode or engagement of your sympathetic nervous system, into engagement of your parasympathetic nervous system. And really, that's where we're supposed to live. That's when we're calm. That's when we're open. That's when we're generous. That's when we're thoughtful. And actually, I believe that's how we were meant to be. And so this is really the power of compassion. And it has, as has been noted, we can train ourselves and individuals in compassion. And this is actually the power of the mind. And I think this is a key element of Buddhist philosophy that is so powerful. Because so often, especially in modern society and with the distractions, many people look outside of themselves in the hopes that there will be some magical answer to why they're unhappy or why they're suffering. And the extraordinary thing is that with training, you can actually, if you want to say, make a decision to be happy, to be calm. And as His Holiness has said, if you want to make others happy, be compassionate. If you wish to be happy, be compassionate. And so we have created a 8-week compassion cultivation training program, or CCT, which more recently we've evolved into a program called Cultivating the Heart, which is not quite as mindfulness based, but has elements that we've learned over time actually improve one's ability to be compassionate. And I think one of the key elements here, though, is that to be compassionate, you have to be self-compassionate. And this requires you to have deep introspection and be able to calm the mind and the body. And of course, these are the key principles that Jon Kabat-Zinn included in his mindfulness practice, which I think most of you know has arisen from Buddhist practice. The difference, I think, in regard to what we teach at Stanford is that we recognize, especially in the West, how critically important it is to be self-compassionate. So we include that as a significant part of the training that we offer. And the reason is because if you're hypercritical of yourself, first of all, it's hard to be calm. It's hard to relax. It's hard to attend. And so a significant amount of time is spent on training an individual to not only not respond to the negative thoughts that go by us all the time, but actually to have positive affirmations telling yourself that you're worthy, you deserve love. And this practice, in and of itself, actually strengthens the practice of giving unconditional love or compassion to other sentient beings. And I think also to recognize on some level that the earth is a living being that we must also give compassion to. And when you're able to, one, emotionally regulate, which is part of the practice, because of course, in the modern world, we have so many distractions. And unfortunately, as a species, we turn to threat much more than we turn to positive things. And the reason is, as I mentioned from our evolutionary imperative, threat is what potentially can result in our demise. So we have to attend to that. And unfortunately, as part of that evolutionary baggage, it sticks to us. And once you're able, though, to emotionally regulate and not be frozen by fear, then actually you can unleash the compassion that is always present there, but which unfortunately oftentimes is suppressed by the nature of the modern world we live in. And then you can embody this idea in Buddhist practice, of course, compassion for all sentient beings. And I think it's important as part of what we do to indicate that if you are able to embrace this type of a practice, you actually begin to see the other as yourself. And when you see the other as yourself, in some ways, you also see the suffering you've been through. You see the love that has been given to you. And it makes you much more thoughtful and kind in your interactions with others. And I think that's one of the key aspects that these types of practices bring from a Buddhist philosophical perspective, because we sometimes forget that everyone is suffering. And it's very easy oftentimes to focus on ourselves and to begin ruminating. And if you're able to direct your thoughts outward and see that others are suffering, it is a very, very powerful antidote to one ruminating on their perceived suffering. And it actually diminishes one's suffering. I like the grace mnemonic that Roshi Joan has developed. One of the mnemonics that we use as part of our teaching is basically 10 letters of the alphabet. And in many ways, this characterizes, I believe, many aspects of Buddhist philosophy. Of course, that starts with C, compassion for self and others. And it includes D, recognizing the dignity of every person. And I think that oftentimes is a challenge for many people in modern society because there's a tendency to look at others oftentimes as less than yourself. And this is very sad, of course, but when you're able to recognize the dignity of everyone, it changes the dynamic, because now you're looking at each other as equals. There is no down, there is no up. You're both suffering individuals who wish to help the other. Another key component from Buddhist philosophy, of course, is this concept of equanimity. One of the greatest challenges for many is attachment and craving. And of course, those are the fundamental causes of suffering for so many. Of course, the key aspect also is avoidance of pain and seeking pleasure. And this leads to this discussion of hedonic versus eudaimonic happiness. But fundamentally, one must be able to not attach and crave, because that cultivates ego, and it also can be extraordinarily destructive. The other aspect, of course, is forgiveness. And so many of us have a tendency to carry anger and hostility based on an experience or an interaction. And being able to forgive and not carry that anger and hostility is a fundamental practice as well. Because what that does is when you carry that, it's very unsettling and results in your own decreased ability to attend and be present, which is necessary to have authentic relationships, but also to cultivate your own compassion. And then there's gratitude, which we know from a variety of studies is critically important to understand how privileged you are to be in this world. And then humility, this concept again of recognizing that we are all one. And it is through our common humanity that allows us to be our best selves. And then there's this concept of integrity and values, what bounds your behavior, as well as a concept of justice, recognizing our privileged position to be able to attend to those who are suffering or who are vulnerable. And all of this is contained by love. And I think this encapsulates a lot of what we try to teach in the programs that we have. It was mentioned by one of our other speakers about the suffering of healthcare workers. And of course, as a neurosurgeon, a physician, and a neuroscientist, I'm very engaged in this. And that is a challenge because of the burdens that are so often put on physicians, as well as a sense of moral injury, because so often they wish to do things but are unable to do it because of the constraints that have been defined, frankly, by our corporate healthcare system. And this is very distressing. And yes, these types of practices, training individuals in compassion cultivation, cultivating the heart, or the other programs we've talked about, while they are helpful, I don't want to mislead anyone to imply that these solve the problem. They are a Band-Aid, but ultimately it will require significant change in how the healthcare system works. But there is no question that the integration of these different types of mind training or meditative types of practices demonstrably have shown through an innumerable number of studies that they change the brain, they allow one to emotionally regulate, they allow one to be self-compassionate, they allow one to be compassionate, and fundamentally, this results in a better world. Now, it has been mentioned, of course, that we're seeing so many things around us that are extraordinarily disturbing and challenging. And for some people, that causes constant distress and upset. And I think it's important to recognize that each of us can only do what we can do and not take on the burden of the world, because there will always be some degree of suffering. But what we have learned from these types of practices is that within the context of our world, these types of practices help many, many others, and of course, help ourselves. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Doty, and especially for bringing in the neuroscience, your specialty, of course, and helping us recognize the deep impact that these practices have actually on our neurological wiring. And one similarity I'm seeing in a lot of our programs is the love of mnemonic devices. It's just the creativity that goes into crafting these. And of course, it's also an educational awareness because we can remember things so much more clearly. So it's a beautiful pedagogy. But so thank you for sharing with us, Dr. Doty. Okay, so now we're gonna shift. We have a couple of representatives who've been informed by Christian traditions and compassion cultivation. And our first presenter is Sister Mary Dean Fowler, who is a Catholic nun, a former educator, pastoral minister in both Hawaii and Papua New Guinea. She's a seasoned spiritual director and retreat leader, and is now a lead teacher for the Boundless Compassion program, compassion cultivation program that's rooted in Christian spiritual traditions and was inspired by Joyce Rupp's work. So Sister Fowler, we are delighted that you are with us and look forward to your wisdom on compassion cultivation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rogers. It is really delightful to be here and to hear so many wonderful aspects of the programs and approaches that others are taking. Boundless Compassion is a movement that inspires participants to be a compassionate presence in a suffering world. Joyce Rupp is the author of a book called Boundless Compassion, Creating a Way of Life, and the originator of this movement. Over the years, she's reflected on voices, both sacred and scientific, that encourage the practice of compassion. And that prompted her to ask the question, I wonder who's teaching Christians to be compassionate? In the Christian tradition, to explore the nature of compassion is to explore the nature of the divine. Compassion has a face, Jesus, the visible image of the invisible God. Christians are called to recognize the image of the Creator in every human being and to follow the example of Jesus, who was aware that every being suffers and was moved to respond. By accepting suffering himself, Jesus reveals a God who is in solidarity with suffering humanity. As Joyce writes, Boundless Compassion extends an invitation to grow in the kind of love that motivated Jesus to be a compassionate presence. As several of you have said, compassion is both inborn and can be cultivated. From our perspective, compassion begins with becoming aware of suffering, yours and mine, and then seeing suffering may soften and open my heart, changing my attitude toward the one who's in distress. And that leads to action to reduce suffering. So the movement flows from awareness to attitude change to action. Or if we use the body as an image, from the mind to the heart to the hands. Recognizing our common humanity, I'm moved to share the suffering of the one whom I now see as my other me. Just think about that well-known parable of the Good Samaritan, which captures this movement. The Samaritan sees the victim of violence. His heart opens, and he crosses the road to tend to the one who's been damaged and in distress. Gratefully, we can grow in our capacity to lessen suffering. And so this word cultivating is an apt metaphor for how compassion gradually unfolds in a fertile heart. The essential components of cultivating compassion, what are called the seeds of compassion, include non-judgment, non-violence, forgiving, and mindfulness. Non-judgment, because I see myself and the other as an image of the holy. I respect what the other believes and what they value. Non-violence, because we all share a common humanity. Forgiving, because the alternative creates an obstacle to my own healing and freedom. And mindfulness, because how else would I become aware of the suffering within and around me and respond? Once we begin reflecting on compassion, it always seems to come around to reflection on suffering. From the boundless compassion perspective, the divine being does not send suffering. Suffering happens because of the human condition, because of greed, other people's failures, mistakes, dishonesty. Suffering happens because of accidents and natural disasters, because of our own choices. The mission of Christians, as I understand it, is to reduce meaningless suffering. Yet, suffering can be seen as a gift. A person can be transformed by suffering. As you know, some of the most compassionate people have suffered greatly. Suffering has opened their hearts, and as a result, they're able to feel with others in distress. The boundless compassion vision pictures an ever-widening circle. Gradually, the circle of compassion expands, beginning with we open to the suffering that we ourselves experience and the suffering of those closest to us. But that gradually opens up into an awareness and a connection with the suffering of others, particularly those on the margins. Jesus went to marginalized people. In fact, he identified with them when he said, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. But that's not as far as it goes. The circle of compassion widens even further to include all of creation, because the cosmic Christ is all and in all. One might think that the Christian tradition would have much to say about compassion, given that Jesus' whole life and ministry embody it. Yet, it can be challenging to find contemporary resources that explore compassion from a Christian perspective while engaging other wisdom traditions and scientific research. That makes for an exciting adventure as boundless compassion works to weave these various strands together by collaborating in so many ways with others. Here's a couple of examples of how that's happening. Naming compassion as a deeper dimension of healthcare or body work, financial planning, anti-racism, drama, and education is helping people realize how their efforts are contributing to the survival of humanity. Participants in retreats and other offerings find themselves more compassionate toward themselves. Because they've made friends with themselves, they are more resilient and available to help others who suffer. Each of the seeds of compassion, nonviolence, non-judgment, mindfulness, forgiving, give participants plenty of personal opportunities to cultivate the desire to prevent or lessen suffering. And participants are discovering that compassion is possible, that living compassionately may not change what I do, but how I do it. At the same time, some are also seeking ways to be a compassionate presence, to lean into suffering more deliberately and tangibly. All these dimensions are shaping a community around the desire to cultivate compassion and extend it. Participants realize they're not alone, and that gives us hope. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our part in this whole venture.
Thank you so much, Sister Fowler, for sharing us that question that, what would it look like for Christians to be intentional about cultivating compassion, and for picking up that gauntlet and doing so much beautiful work around that. So very, very grateful. And our last panelist presenter today is Dr. Isaiah Young. Dr. Young is a professor of spiritual formation and co-director of the Center for Engaged Compassion at the Claremont School of Theology, an ordained Pentecostal Christian minister. He's an award-winning author himself and has been doing psycho-spiritual practitioner work, devoting a lot of his energies with communities in solidarity of QT BIPOC folks. Very grateful for the work that you do, Dr. Young, and for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rogers, and to all of the esteemed panelists. I'm really just savoring the wisdom and the beauty of the work that's unfolding in so many different dimensions. Myself, I'm very grateful to be part of this program with the GCC, because compassion is something that has really transformed my life, experiencing it firsthand and also getting to see the effects it can have in working towards social transformation and personal renewal, institutional change. And so to begin, I'd just like to start by reflecting on compassion. Obviously, the etymology of compassion, cum pati in Latin, is literally to suffer with or to suffer alongside. And we've heard so many articulations eloquently about that. But it really is compassion, a relational and embodied awareness that all of life is interwoven and interrelated. And when we are in that awareness, we're moved to alleviate suffering and also to promote joy, to promote restoration, to notice when others are experiencing a sense of flourishing in life, and to celebrate alongside of that. And so in the Christian tradition, which I've been trained, I'm an ordained minister, this really comes from Jesus's direct experience of the divine, something he referred to the divine life as Abba, which literally translates to father, loving parent. And so Jesus's experience with the divine life was one of a loving parent, one of unconditional regard and acceptance and warmth and care. And this was really significant for Jesus because, of course, he came from a marginalized community himself. The work of Marcus Borg, Howard Thurman, and so many others point out how Jesus himself was coming from an oppressed community. And so his ministry, the miracles he did, the way he moved in the world politically and socially, it came from that experience of being marginalized. And him knowing a God that was compassionate was, of course, then profound in his own life and journey. And then so many of the miracles which Jesus did were because compassion was moved inside of him. And so when he would feed the hungry, when he would heal the sick, even when he would heal the ear of the Roman official who was literally arresting him unjustly and taking him to be murdered, and his ear was cut off by one of Jesus' followers, Jesus was moved by compassion to heal the ear of the Roman official. And so we see countless examples of this embodiment, and we see that this spark of compassion was not only available in him, but it was this sense of compassion that he promised his followers when he left them. In the last days before he was taken away, he told his followers, as they were afraid, that I'm not going to leave you totally abandoned. In fact, I'm going to give you a gift. And that gift I'm going to give you is the presence of the Holy Spirit, which in the biblical language is translated to the paraclete, literally meaning the helper or the advocate. The helper or the advocate, the counselor who comes to lead and instruct us in the life of compassion. So Jesus promises this gift of the paraclete, the Holy Spirit, to say the same compassion that I know and I've tasted, I've offered to you, you have available within you. And so the calling to be the early church was to live in this empowered sense through Jesus' spirit of compassion, which was uniquely revealed in Jesus, but of course wasn't just owned by Jesus or the Christian tradition, but this sense of compassion was available in different circumstances, across cultural traditions, across different expressions. And this is really revealed in the Pentecost narrative in the New Testament, which talks about the diverse languages that the early followers spoke, the sense of empowerment by God's Spirit to not only speak of the divine life in diverse languages, but to understand it in diverse ways. And so we really see this sense of compassion, not something that's owned by Christians, of course, but as something that's revealed across different cultures and wisdom traditions in humanity. And so this is really a beautiful invitation, because then it's not just that compassion can only be cultivated in religious settings or in religious institutions, but it's something available in many different areas of our life, as we've heard many different panelists discuss. And I wanted to share very briefly just my own experience with this that was so transformative. It was about 5.5 years ago. I was a doctoral student, and I was just coming home, actually celebrating the day of my oral exams, defending my oral exams. And on the way home in Southern California, I was on the freeway and endured a very severe automobile accident that, for all intents and purposes, really I should not have lived through. And I ended up there on the Southern California freeway, very vulnerable and helpless from this car accident. And there was 3 strangers who, in the middle of the afternoon, who knows what they were onto that day or what their plans were for that day, but they literally stopped their vehicles, positioned their vehicles in the middle of the freeway to block oncoming traffic from me, was laying there in the middle of the road. And they got out of their vehicles and they came to my side to be with me, to offer care for me, to check in, to see if there was anything they could do to alleviate any suffering that I was feeling. I remember even one moment, by the way I was laying on the road, my neck was in a very difficult position. And I asked one of them if they could just hold up my neck, just briefly in the side of the road, to allow from some of the pressure that was on that part of my body. And they literally, for what felt like, an eternity, they were sitting there with me, holding up my neck, ensuring that I was not alone in my moment of precarity and vulnerability. And so it was that kind of revelation of compassion that we're talking about, where you're moved to understand that our life is interconnected, to even put one's life at risk at times, to show up and to stand with and stand by another person. And really, I believe that it was their example that saved my life, that preserved my life, and continues to remind me of how powerful compassion can be in the world. And so at the Center for Engaged Compassion here at Claremont School of Theology, we get to teach about this. It's a 12-week program that was created by Frank Rogers Jr., our wonderful moderator today, Dr. Andrew Dreitzer, as well as Mark Iaconelli. And it's really a way of experiencing firsthand compassion in one's own life and one's own experiences. And it teaches how to cultivate that sense of compassion to others, our friends, our neighbors, strangers, and of course, even our enemies. And so how do we find a way of connection forward to all of life, including the human, but we said it's Earth Day, also the more than human life? How do we connect compassionately to animals, to the cosmic realm, and even the divine realm as well? How do we open ourselves to vulnerability and experiencing that and offering a sense of care and connection? And so I love the different Christian examples throughout history, the mystics and contemplatives who have given different images to this. And one I just wanted to lift up, I think is very profound. Julian of Norwich, who was the first woman to write in the English language a full book. Of course, she had a radical encounter with the divine life and her own experience and visions when she was living through her own pandemic, going through the time of the plague in Europe. And when she was reflecting upon God's compassion, God's care, the image that she connected that to was the image of a nursing mother, right? The image of a mother who was breastfeeding and caring for their child by giving of oneself, one's nutrients to provide the vitality and necessary support for another. And for Julian, she said, this is how the divine sees us, willing to support and care and offer all that one has available so that another could be restored and flourish. And so it's that beautiful image. I'm a parent of 4 children who are all very young and little. And so that image of a loving parent who would literally offer a mother their own body at the service to care for another, I think is a very powerful image of compassion, one that we understand lives in the divine, but it also lives within all of us. It's an empowered presence that we can respond with as we cultivate that and as we become aware of it in ourselves. I want to conclude with just a few of the challenges that, of course, we find in some of the work that we do, working with pastors and educators and chaplains and nonprofit activists and leaders. One of the major challenges we find as we continue to live through an era of really rich diversity is for a lot of those who were raised in Christianity, or maybe want to understand Christianity and also due to the colonial histories attached to it, sometimes there is a sense that Christians kind of have the right answers, right, about how all this works. And so a lot of the challenges we still want to work with, especially for those who identify as Christian, is to say that qualities of compassion, the ways of living it out, there's so much we can learn from other traditions and languages and practices, beautifully today from Buddhist traditions, but others, Hindu traditions, secular traditions, scientific traditions, and otherwise. There's so many different examples, indigenous traditions, earth-based traditions, how to experience this sense of compassion. And so we constantly want to create bridges and opportunities to deepen our sense of what this looks like by turning to the wisdom of other traditions and languages as a distinctly Christian task. The second big challenge, I think, has to do with the intergenerational and collective traumas and cycles of oppression that we've all been born into. So we know of those maybe due to race, religion, and gender. But also things like the overemphasis on rationalism and rationalistic analysis, as opposed to kind of embodied experiential wisdom, right? So some of us have been trained so hard to get the ideas, get the facts, but we've neglected some of the subtle wisdoms that come from our embodied experiences, as well as a certain reductionism that seems very common, which emphasizes our materiality and production of goods and exchange of resources, as opposed to our mutual relationships, our life-affirming relationships with one another, not only as people, but again, with our more than human friends and siblings in the world. And so because we've been born into this, right, until we really face it and we choose to live out an alternative to this, then that means the call to engage compractice will land differently with different types of bodies, different types of communities based on their social location, based on their own stories and histories. And so if we are in the business of learning about compassion and facilitating it and connecting with others from diverse circumstances, it's very important that we pay close attention to those diversities of how our teachings land, of what invitations are there, and how do we create classrooms or containers or spaces so that that wisdom of the collective can really emerge in life-affirming ways. And so it's not something that can be simplified or easy. There's not one manual to it, but I think it's a challenge and an opportunity that we have in this growing digital age that we live. And so those are a few things that come up with our work, but I again want to thank the panel for just a wonderful opportunity to share and reflect together.
Thank you, Dr. Yang, for your presentation as well. And thank you also for sharing that poignant story of what happened to you on your way home and the power that compassion had right literally in the middle of the freeway It strikes me that it was kind of appropriate for you to share a story. That's one of the things that's in the Center for Engaged Compassion. It's a very story-based approach to cultivating compassion, listening to our own stories, hearing the stories of others, and the power of story to be able to open our hearts towards other people. So thank you for that. Thank all of you. I'm so grateful. What this has done is whetted my appetite. I want to participate in every one of your programs and kind of learn them from the inside. But it also has whetted my appetite. We are all kind of practitioners. We are teachers in the compassion cultivation programs, and I feel like this is just whetting the appetite for just dozens of conversations I'd like to have about different tools of the trade and things that have emerged, and challenges you face and how you're navigating those, and questions that emerge for you as we hear each other's programs. And so I'm thinking, let's imagine this is not as the end of our conversation. We only have about 10 or 15 minutes left, but this is a beginning of a conversation that will continue in various ways. And so I'm wondering if we might just take a few moments for each of us to ponder what are we holding as we've listened to all of these presentations that we would find helpful to continue to explore together with each other's work. What questions have emerged? What insights from each other's programs feel promising to pursue? What kind of a conversation would be helpful as we who are in the research, given our vocations to actually cultivating compassion, have an opportunity to be with our peers? What would be helpful for us to explore together, if not in this conversation, conversations to come? I'd love to hear your final insights or thoughts around that.
I see everybody's jumping on the opportunity to respond to you. Well, it's interesting, I think, and I'm sure all of you know Karen Armstrong, who founded the Charter for Compassion. And when she won the 2008 TED Prize, she got together with 19 spiritual and religious leaders and found that at the core of every religion, compassion serves as the basis as well as the golden rule. And I think what that shares with us is the universality of compassion being at the core of our humanity. And it's interesting because, of course, why is that the case? And I think from an experiential level, essentially all civilizations have learned over thousands of years that, in fact, compassion is a critical component not only to define our humanity, but to allow us to thrive and prosper in this world. And I think the recognition that each culture defines a dogma around that reality allows us to understand that at the core, we are all the same, and to have gentleness, tenderness, acceptance of the belief systems of others, because fundamentally we are all trying to do the same thing, which is to support each other, to give people insights and tools to improve themselves, improve those around them, and allow us to thrive as human beings, understanding that having openness, acceptance, non-judgment are critical aspects of our humanity.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Doty. Very powerful.
I'll be really quick. I really appreciated, Dr. Young, your calling to the attention that as we begin, or as we do our work of sharing our programs, to keeping in mind that the compassion it's not something that we need to be kind of just imposing that what we understand how, it's not one way, but rather really respecting the individual cultures, the background, because there is so much wisdom that is represented in different cultures, and I think when we are as all of us are involved in offering these programs, perhaps scaling it, that's where I think being mindful that we need to respect different approaches, different cultures, and it's not feel like that the one way is the right way, but rather have this multiple respect for approaches.
I really appreciate that comment about not falling into the mind of poverty and thinking that there's limited opportunities and limited ways of accessing this part of ourselves. And, I think it's really important now that we consider, to Dr. Doty's point, I actually don't believe that compassion is a Band-Aid in response to some of the bigger challenges that we are facing. I think it is the answer. That the only way we are going to be able to change the people in the system, which is all of us, and the systems where we live and practice, is to connect with each other and to look for those opportunities for collaboration, for understanding, for sharing wisdom. Because what isn't working is when we begin to create dichotomies of either or. I think compassion is a framework of inclusion. And that includes our leaders, it includes our government, it includes our neighbors, it includes all of us. And I think that has some real potential for us to be able to heal our world if we can resonate in whatever pathway it takes for us to access compassion. I think that is the way forward.
Just to comment, Cindy, on what you were saying, I didn't mean to denigrate in any way the power of compassion. What I was indicating was that oftentimes organizations try and promote compassion cultivation training programs to solve the fundamental structural problems that they have created without actually addressing the core problem. And I think there's subtlety in that statement that I hope I just clarified.
I'd like to comment on the question about perseverance in this effort and the patience required to be a compassionate presence in the world. And it's indicated, obviously, in the various programs that are being offered by all of the entities that we represent. It's a process of learning, but it's a process of practicing as well. And so the discernment involved in entering into this practice and the patience that's required to build a community and to support that community, to support one another in this practice, I think is essential. We cannot do this alone, which is witnessed by the fact that here we all are together trying to make this happen.
Dr. Young, I want to give you an opportunity for any final words that you have with you, or things you're holding, questions, curiosities.
Yeah, I'm just really appreciating that we are living through a time of change and transition on many different levels of different sectors of how we do things, and we're seeing kind of the effects of not maybe making some changes, and so we have big opportunities in front of us to kind of move towards what we've all described, which is partnership, which is mutuality, which is co-leadership, co-facilitation, really allowing for the different insights, especially for, again, I want to lift up those that have been marginalized but by dominant cultures and not able to fully share and celebrate the richness of what they offer. Is so important because it's like a healthy ecosystem, right? It thrives because of diversity. It thrives because not everything's the same. Everything's feeding into each other and moving and in relationship and honoring that giving and exchanging. And so now we have this beautiful opportunity with places like the GCC and all the programs we're leading to really be part of that, like building paths to one another, like opening up ourselves to be vulnerable for that encounter and see what happens when we meet each other on the journey and on the path. And so I'm really grateful for all those who have watched and those will continue to engage together. I think we have some really incredible opportunities to meet each other and to work together and find creative, emergent ways to respond for our moment.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. And I sit here, I kind of have two things that I'm noticing that I'm feeling right now. One is I'm just feeling so much energy around talking nuts and bolts around the things that we've learned in our compassion cultivation programs. I realize there's something of a compassion geek in me that really kind of wants, look at the curricula and, so how did you lead this practice and what happened when folks were engaging this? I remember being part of the C-Care program a number of years ago, and the observation was that the self-compassion was a real challenge for folks. It was harder to have compassion for our own suffering, and so how did we find ways to be able to help open persons up into a greater compassion for themselves, and the question around longevity and people staying committed to the programs, and how do we make spaces where people are being so richly fed and met that they come look forward to these particular programs as opposed to one more thing that they have to do, and something we at the Center for Engaged Compassion wrestle with a lot is what do we do with all of those impulses in us that are not compassionate? What Christian traditions would call the deadly sins, perhaps, or the near and far enemies of compassion in Buddhist traditions. And one of the approaches we take is instead of fighting them, what would it be like to have compassion for those, to recognize that those are cries of the soul, that those are some suffering impulses within us, and how might we extend a healing and restorative compassion to that. All of these geeky questions I would love for us to be able to explore and learn deeply from one another. But the other thing that holds all of that is just a deep sense of gratitude to each of you for the work that you are doing, and a deep sense of inspiration. I found myself just nodding at every single person's presentation about what is compassion, how important it is, what are different factors that contribute to that. And they're just so, we are so much allies in this work that we're doing, and that bodes so well for the wounds of the world, those wars within us that are lying so close to the bone. One thing I noticed was, I think in every presentation there was an allusion to a mother holding an infant or a care. There's something archetypal about that image that just evokes in us that is emblematic of compassion. And so my hope is that our time together might help deepen our own sense of that womb-like regard, that womb-like love that interpenetrates throughout this universe, that is in each of our souls, and really is a restorative medicine for our world, that we might be able to work together to help cultivate that deep sense within us. And immense gratitude to the Global Compassion Coalition. This is an extraordinary organization that not only sponsors conversations like this, it has its own training programs within it. It has networking opportunities for organizations. It has resource centers. It has libraries. It staffs symposia. It's an extraordinary movement in our world that promises to make a deep impact. And so thank you for the GCC for hosting this. May it only thrive and flourish in the world. And thank you, each of you, for participating in this. I genuinely look forward to further collaborations. So thank you all.